Erling Haaland is only owned by 30% of FPL managers right now, which I think is crazy. And as we get closer to the deadline, I think that ownership is only going to increase. And I'm going to show you why in today's video, especially with the best draft that you could build with Haaland in it. So as always, if you're new around here, please do consider dropping a like on the video. And of course, smashing that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. And enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So Erling Haaland being in only 30% of FPL teams is just wild to me. So we need to deep dive into why exactly that is the case, because obviously there is something going on here. Now, I for one am glad we are seeing a divide in the community, and the reason being so is because of the price increase. Haaland coming in at 15 million, the most expensive option in the history of FPL, is making managers question whether this is actually worth bringing into our teams, because in previous seasons with him being priced at 14 last year, it was a no-brainer, and his ownership was at 80% pretty much every game week. And adding on to captaincy, the effective ownership was around 150 to 200 at times. So it really was a little bit stale, the game. So I'm really glad they have increased the price to 15 million. And with him only being 30% owned, you can see more managers are preferring to go without him than with him. But when we look at the stats here, it is probably going to make you double take what you are doing if you are currently going without him. So just a quick reminder, last season was a below average performance in terms of the general view of Erling Haaland. 27 goals, 8 assists. I mean, any other player that bags that is having a worldy season. The only reason being is because the season before his debut season, he racked up 36 goals and 9 assists. Now, I just need to put it out there first and foremost that when we look at the overall XG for both seasons, in his debut season, he had a total XG of 28.5. Season just gone, 29.57. So this is a player right now that actually had equally good season. His finishing ability just wasn't up to scratch of what we had in his debut season. We can see the numbers here based on per 90 minutes. 0.95 goals per 90 is just ridiculous. But the even crazier stat is that his XG per 90 was actually 1.04. So hence why his finishing ability wasn't actually up to scratch this year compared to what we saw in his debut season. Shots per 90 at 4.29, on target at 2. We need to remind ourselves that we are getting a slight change in the bonus point system where shots on target are actually getting rewarded. So a shot volume monster like Erling Haaland is one of those beneficiaries this year. And of course, I'm ignoring the assist stuff because we are not bothered about that when it comes to Erling Haaland. So in terms of underlying numbers, we kind of knew all this stuff. We knew that he was a monster when it comes to stats and in terms of general output. So looking at the fixtures coming up, game week 1, I think a lot of people are looking at thinking, do I really need Erling Haaland? Well, I need to remind everybody that last season at Stamford Bridge, it was 4-4. It was goals galore. This is an incredibly unpredictable fixture because, of course, Chelsea under a new management in Maresca, nobody really knows what that team is going to look like. But game week 2 is the real money fixture at home against Ipswich. I think Ipswich are going to be surprising a few teams, but any team that comes to the Etihad, I just think is going to roll over for Man City. And I think Ipswich is going to be another example of that team where the level up is just not going to be something they can match. Beyond that, West Ham, Brentford, I think are two favourable fixtures before we come on to a bit of a trickier period with Arsenal at home in game week 5 and Newcastle away in game week 6. So based on the fixtures, I would actually argue that they're quite mixed. I wouldn't look at these and say to myself, you need Erling Haaland over this period. The reason why I think Erling Haaland is just essential in our teams is because of the player that he is. I don't think anybody comes close to him in our FPL teams. And I think we can, of course, put other players in our drafts, which we will come on to in a minute, to compensate for not having Erling Haaland. But when we look at these fixtures, in particular game week 2 and the underlying numbers, I know 15 million is super expensive, but we need to remember Haaland is going to be rested the entire summer. He will be fresh to go in game week 1. And I think naturally a lot of people are going to move towards Haaland the closer we get. But let's take a look at a player that, of course, a lot of managers are looking to maybe cover Erling Haaland within their sides. So, of course, last season was probably Foden's breakthrough year from an FPL point scoring perspective. He was consistent with his returns. And when we take a look at the underlying numbers here, we can see that he is never going to be up to scratch with Erling Haaland in terms of expected goals. You can see that here. 0.33 expected goals for Foden compared to Erling Haaland's 1.04. So, first and foremost, we need to remember that even though Phil Foden had a phenomenal season last year and he actually did outscore Erling Haaland, from an underlying stats perspective, he doesn't come close to the numbers that Haaland puts up. But I think that was a given when we were considering it. The thing that Foden has going for him is his price at 9.5 million. So when we're looking at the fixtures coming up right now, if you don't go with Erling Haaland, I think it's a scary prospect not to have any Man City coverage in game week 2. So naturally, if managers are going without Erling Haaland, I think they probably have to go to Phil Foden just to give themselves some coverage. And I do think he's a fantastic option. 9.5 million for guaranteed minutes in this side. The only thing I would argue right now, of course, it was a taxing season for Foden and a Euros campaign. Could we see potentially him being a rotation risk in the opening few fixtures as Pep starts to ease him back in, because he will be not in the Man City team for a couple of weeks now due to his involvement in the Euro final. So we could see a situation where maybe Phil Foden doesn't start the season. And then we start to look at it and think to ourselves, well, if Foden's not starting the season, where are we getting that Man City coverage outside of Erling Haaland? And naturally, people like Kevin De Bruyne could be options, or maybe a Jack Grealish, but those feel like transfers just waiting to happen in your team. So I think Phil Foden is a phenomenal option, and I really do think that if you're going without Erling Haaland, then you kind of need Phil Foden in your team as long as he is guaranteed to play game week 1. But I think it comes back to it. When I look at the underlying numbers and I look at the team that Man City are, even though Foden had a phenomenal season, this is just a one-man team when it comes to goal scoring. And I really always want the goal scorer in one of the best teams in the league. So we're going to come on to some drafts now to kind of analyse how our team could look with Erling Haaland in it. But I think the more we look at these stats and how absurd they are, I just feel like Erling Haaland is naturally going to come back into our teams as Phil Foden maybe has a bit of a stop-start season at the start. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but let's take a look at some team structures for Haaland in them. So for anybody that is new around FPL, and of course, if you've played it for a while, hopefully you do know this already, but we get a £100 million budget. So of course, if we do allocate 15 million for Erling Haaland, that is a fair chunk used up already. So what I've got here is a bit of a draft structure on what you can afford for your teams, just to get a bit of an idea. And I really do love actually looking at things like this, because it gives me a bit of an understanding on where the sacrifices need to be made, especially when we go for a premium like Erling Haaland. Now, straight out of the bat, I need to say this. If you're going for a premium like Erling Haaland, then you are naturally going to be making sacrifices in the goalkeeper department. I really don't think the goalkeepers is a place where you can afford to also have a 5.5 million goalkeeper and the premium in Erling Haaland up top. So straight away, I think if you're going for Haaland, you are almost accepting that you are going for a 4.5 million goalkeeper. So that could be someone like Sanchez at Chelsea, Flecken at Brentford, or even a Verbruggen at Brighton, who of course is currently injured. And then you are going to be going for the 4 million goalkeeper backup. I think that's just a non-negotiable when you go for Erling Haaland. And again, when we come into the defenders right now, you can see that the structure that we have with this team right now is that we can afford a premium at 6 million. Of course, the only players more expensive at 6 million is going to be someone like a Trent Alexander-Arnold or a 6.5 million option like Ben White. Otherwise, I think there are some good 6 million options available that you can go towards. You can also have a 5 million defender, whether that be Reece James once he returns from his suspension, or other options. And then we can fill our teams with 4.5 million options and, of course, the budget enabler. When we look at the midfield, this is where the big sacrifice most likely needs to be made. You can afford, and of course, spoiler alert, that is going to be Mo Salah. Probably you can tell with the hairstyle. You can get a 12.5 million midfielder in your team. But then the big sacrifice is made is I haven't been able to see a structure where you can have Salah and someone like a Cole Palmer at 10.5 million and still have a team that is functional in the opening game week. So if you go for Haaland and you go for Mo Salah, you are then looking at going all the way down to a 7.5 million option. It's worth noting, I think there are great options available, but you are going to be skipping basically the 10.5 million options in Cole Palmer and the 8.5 million option in Bruno Fernandes. Anything between that, this draft doesn't really cater towards. But as I mentioned, I think there are really good options around the 7.5 to 6.5 million range that you can go for. And of course, looking at the structure that I have put in place here, you can make some sacrifices. For example, the 5 million midfielder, the fifth one, you could downgrade that to a 4.5 like a Harry Winks, free up 0.5 million, and you could then maybe invest that in one of the cheaper midfielders in the game. In terms of the forwards, again, you can make some sacrifices here, but with the price points of Watkins at 9, Isak at 8.5 and Havertz at 8, I think it's going to be a very brave manager for you not to have some sort of investment in those three forwards alongside Erling Haaland. So 8.5 million just to average it out, I do think you can get a great forward in your squad. And then at 5.5 million, there are some emerging options. But once again, from a structure perspective, if you wanted to save some money, what you could do is downgrade the 5.5 to a 4.5 million forward. Straight away, you freed up 1 million. And as I've spoken about before, you could then downgrade the 5 million midfielder to a 4.5. Then we have 1.5 million available. Then we could look to maybe change the structure of this team. You could, for example, upgrade the 7 million midfielder to an 8.5, like a Bruno Fernandes, or you could improve the defenders. But based on this right now, looking at it, I think if you go for Erling Haaland and Mo Salah, your team is looking something like this. If you go without Mo Salah, then of course, what you can do is spread yourself across the midfielders and get yourself a 10.5 midfielder and maybe a 9 million midfielder and really get this team looking a bit more balanced. But what I do think is you can't be going for premium goalkeepers, and I don't think you can be going for premium defenders. But looking at this structure, I think it is actually quite decent. And what I'll do now is show you exactly what this team could look like. So first up, the goalkeepers, and as I mentioned, we aren't going to be spending much in this department. I think there are 3 4.5 million options available. I think there's Flecken at Brentford. I think there's Verbruggen at Brighton. But currently I have got Robert Sanchez. But it's worth noting, a recent tweet from Fabrizio Romano has stated that Chelsea are looking to bring in a new goalkeeper to compete with Robert Sanchez. But what Fabrizio has confirmed is that he is actually going to be the starting goalkeeper this season. So if Chelsea do not recruit in the summer, Robert Sanchez is going to be Chelsea's number one based on this news, which is really appealing. And I, for one, think if Chelsea don't recruit, this is actually great for our FPL team. So as of right now, Sanchez is in. But I do think if they do recruit another goalkeeper, you can easily fall back on Verbruggen or Flecken in your sides. And realistically, with those 3 goalkeepers available, I don't think you then need to go to the 5 million goalkeeper or the 5.5, especially if we are going for a Haaland draft this year. And of course, no 4 million goalkeeper has emerged right now, so we're just going to stick with Turner. Next up, the defenders. And again, as I mentioned when we were at the team structure, we can't be going up to someone like a 7 million Trent because we need to make other sacrifices in the team. But at 6 million, I really do think there are still some great options available. For example, Saliba of Arsenal. They are currently looking to recruit Carafuri, butchered that, the Italian defender, where that could impact maybe Gabriel's minutes or whoever plays at left back. But we know for sure Saliba's minutes are absolutely locked in. So love Saliba at 6 million for those early Arsenal fixtures. Fixtures change after that, but we could always just keep one Arsenal coverage because they are such an elite defence. But what I'm going to put up here is the combination of having somebody like a Munoz at 5 million at Crystal Palace, which I think is a really exciting attacking option. Konsa and Robinson, because Harwood Bellis at 4 million is most likely just going to be a 5th defender that comes in if there are injuries to the team or the occasional game that Southampton look good in. But what I'm going to put up here is a bit of a rotation planner with those 3 teams for Aston Villa, Crystal Palace and Fulham, just to give you a bit of an idea on what we could do, because Saliba would start every game and we need to then pick 2 of Konsa, Robinson or Munoz, and I think these teams rotate quite well. Game week 1 we'd obviously bench Robinson away against Man United. Game week 2 we'd bench Konsa at home against Arsenal. Game week 3, of course, we would bench Munoz against Chelsea, but I would argue maybe that is a good fixture as well, depending on Chelsea. As you can see, there is always one fixture in particular, apart from maybe game week 5, where there is an obvious player to bench. And I think as well, you get some attacking options in the shape of Robinson and Munoz. You're not just going for the safe and steady centre-backs in the game. So based on this, I think you can get a really, really well-balanced defence, even though you've got Erling Haaland in your teams. Next up, moving into those midfielders, and again, as I stated, I think if you have Erling Haaland, you definitely could go without Mo Salah. But if I had to sit here right now and say to you, which one of the 2 do I think is actually more important? I do think Mo Salah could actually be that option because he's cheaper, he's a midfielder, so of course gets an additional point for a goal and a clean sheet. And I think he will be playing more as a forward this year as opposed to a wide winger that we saw under Jurgen Klopp last year. And the fixtures for Liverpool are phenomenal. So I think you can actually build a good squad with both Salah and Haaland in, which of course I am doing right now. But if you are in a position right now where you're all for Erling Haaland but not for Salah, then this midfield could completely change if you wanted it to. Outside of this, 7.5 million for Gordon, I think is a steal. I think with the fixtures coming up for them, it's fantastic. So Gordon is in. 7 million for Eze, I think is a good option. But this is a Crystal Palace team that are going to be a little bit in a transitional period, especially, of course, if Eze is the one to move. I think at 7 million, Rashford could be a great option, but I need to see a little bit in pre-season, and also Martinelli at Arsenal. So I think the 7 million bracket is actually really exciting, but we also are taking a bit of a punt on the options available in that department. 6.5 million for Nkunku. This is the reason why I think we can put Mo Salah in our teams, because obviously Foden at 9.5, but we've got the coverage in Erling Haaland, so we don't need him. Bukayo Saka, of course, is the player that we're missing in this team at 10, but another taxing summer that he had with the Euros. I don't think he starts the season. And then at 10.5 million for Cole Palmer, that is the real absentee. But with Nkunku being 4 million cheaper and having a full pre-season, whereas Cole Palmer will be on holiday, I think this is just unbelievable FPL value. And even though, of course, if I put them against one another with the same price, I'm going to sit here and tell you Cole Palmer is the better option. But when there's a 4 million price difference, I think it's a no-brainer right now. So Nkunku comes in and he's a brilliant option with great fixtures. And finally, we've gone from Aston Villa's Rodgers, who's had a good pre-season so far, and he was really trusted by Unai Emery last season at the back end. So I think this could be a brilliant pick for our teams. But again, if you don't like the structure, what you could do, for example, is downgrade that to a 4.5 million Harry Winks and take the 0.5 million to invest elsewhere in the team. Or if you could find a 0.5 million, maybe downgrading Munoz to a 4.5, you could then upgrade Rodgers to a Hudson-Odoi, for example, for maybe some more guaranteed minutes. But this midfield, I think, is really well balanced. And finally, we have got the forwards. Now, of course, when we're building an Erling Haaland draft, Haaland has to be in it. So he is going to be in at 15 million. And the reason why we are making some sacrifices in the squad. Isak at 8.5 million. Again, if you're going for Haaland and you're going for Mo Salah, you basically are accepting that you're making sacrifices in the other departments. We've done that in the defensive options. We've done that in the goalkeepers. And even if you love Ollie Watkins, I think you just have to go for Alexander Isak. And I think rightly so. 8.5 million is an absolute steal for somebody who was putting up a 21 XG season and also just such a clinical finisher with fantastic fixtures and, of course, brilliant on penalties. So Isak is just the all-round package, and especially if you're going for Haaland, this one's just a no-brainer to go alongside him. And then outside of that, we have got João Pedro at 5.5 million. Now, it's worth noting right now, we're in a bit of a position where, of course, João Pedro isn't going on pre-season due to an injury, so we do need to monitor that one. And again, as I mentioned, if they're at that position, you can either go to another 5.5 million option up front, or if you don't think this squad is well balanced, downgrade someone like a João Pedro to a 4.5 million option, go for just 2 up top and really look to strengthen the midfield, basically playing a 3-5-2 formation. That isn't out of the realms of possibility right now, and I think maybe that could be the way to cater this squad. Sacrifice the 15th player like João Pedro, come down to a 4.5 million forward, then use the 1 million maybe to upgrade Rodgers to a 5.5 million, and then you have 0.5 million elsewhere to go. So I think this squad here is the way that I would go. I think it is 15 playing players who all rotate really well together. But again, there are nice little tweaks that you can do with this team to get the best possible system. And for that reason, I think even though we do have the absences of Saka's, we have the absences of Palmer and Foden, I think we have most of the coverage there that we want in our team. So again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. But the final thing we need to discuss, of course, is captaincy and whether there are some players out there that could actually cover the captaincy for Haaland. So I think realistically, when we're looking at captaincy, it's going to be either Haaland or Mo Salah for our teams, depending on what team you have. Of course, with this one, we have both options available to us. Most people, 70% who don't have Haaland, will almost certainly have Mo Salah as their option. And of course, those that are going without Mo Salah will most likely have Erling Haaland. Now, looking at the fixtures right now, because of course, with a draft that has both, we need to say to ourselves, if we're paying this much for them, there is going to be one player each week that doesn't have the captaincy armband. So we really need to say to ourselves, can we justify having that player in our team? So in game week 1, I think it's a no-brainer. Mo Salah takes the captaincy with an away game against Ipswich, having a full pre-season as well, similar to Erling Haaland. There's no worries about the minutes for someone like a Mo Salah. So Mo Salah would take the captaincy in game week 1, and straight away you say to yourself, does that mean we should go without Erling Haaland? But then in game week 2, we have that phenomenal fixture at home against Ipswich. But the only argument I would say against that is Mo Salah has a great fixture as well against Brentford at home. And this is why the argument can be swung against not having Erling Haaland, because in the first 2 game weeks, you could definitely make an argument that Mo Salah is equally as good as a captaincy option. Moving into game week 3, I think we would argue that Haaland is the better pick with Salah going away against Man United. And in game week 4, it is a complete coin toss. I couldn't sit here and tell you which one is actually better between Forest and Brentford. And then in game week 5 and game week 6, I'd probably argue that Mo Salah then becomes the better captaincy option. So when we actually look at the captaincy picks, apart from game week 2, and again, I think that could be debated, I think Mo Salah actually becomes one of the better captaincy options. And this is why I'm sitting here saying to this. I still think Haaland offers great value in this game, even though he's 15 million, because I just think when we're looking at a Man City team, everything funnels through him, and I don't think Foden can match him this season. I think he did overperform his numbers massively, even though I think he could be brilliant value at 9.5 million. But what I want to say to you is this: captaincy doesn't have to be on Haaland, but then it does make the option of having him diminish. And I do think Mo Salah over that period probably is, rightly so, the better premium pick. So that's to conclude this. I think Haaland and Salah can be in your teams and still offer brilliant value. But when we're looking at captaincy alone, I do think there is an argument maybe to take Haaland out of your team and strengthen it in other departments. But I wanted to just film this video just to show you that Haaland can still be in your teams. And right now he is still in mine. Yes guys, okay, that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope it has given you a bit of food for thought on whether you are happy without going with Erling Haaland, or of course, if you're somebody who doesn't have him right now, maybe you've just put him in your teams, or maybe this is just confirmed that you don't need him. Either way, hopefully it's provided some value. As always, there is going to be daily fantasy videos throughout the entire preseason. So if you're not already, please do consider being a subscriber. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please do drop a like. As always, if you want additional content, check out the YouTube membership section. Loads of stuff going on there throughout this preseason. As always, have an amazing day and we'll talk real soon. Take care. Cheers.